Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show.
His Dark Materials is a show on the BBC joint made with HBO, where they're doing a telly adaptation of the Philip Pullman book trilogy, His Dark Materials. It's in the name. Episode 205, The Scholar, starts out with Charles and Mrs. C bopping about his Oxford pad. And she's not even really feigning interest at this point, but he's a bit like a nerd who managed to get a hot girl over and he keeps trying to show her his Magic the Gathering cards, or in his case, carvings and antiques. And he ends up letting slip that Lyra went to see Mary Malone, so Mrs. C is all like, well right, I'm off there by myself then. So she locks her monkey up in the bedroom, pops on some modern duds, and straight up just breaks into Mary's office. And Mary's like, who are you? And she's like, well I'm Lyra's mum and I'm a scientist of theology. And Mary's like, oh that's cool. But then Mrs. C legs it out the way after a couple of bits of chat and starts necking Chuck's fine sipping whiskey. Then the doorbell goes, and it's Lyra. Because you see, all this time that this was happening, Lyra and Will have been practicing with a knife to try and cut openings closer and closer to Chuck's house. And while she distracts him, Will goes in to nick the compass. But he gets spotted by Mrs. C and her monkey, and everyone ends up in the same room with Lyra and her mum going at it while Charles and Will sort of try not to fight. But Lyra gets really pissed off and Pan goes full beastie on the monkey, during which Will manages to knock out Charles, grab the compass and then zip both of them out of there. Phew. So now they're all about finding Joffrey, while Mrs. C is convincing Charles to take her back to City Gazi to try and get Lyra and Will back. Meanwhile, Mary's decided to give up on science completely because the voices told her to do it. So she just packs a backpack and then heads off through a tent into the city of City Gazi, off to play the serpent. Which probably sounds a lot dodgier than it actually is. So what did I think? Well, I actually thought this was an interesting episode, because an awful lot of stuff finally came to a head, which makes a lot of sense, considering there's really only 2 more episodes left after this one till the end of the season. So things have to start tying themselves up, and there was a lot of stuff up in the air. And total props to the kid actors in this for making some really solid work. The girl who plays Lyra was fantastic, especially all the stuff relating to her mum. I think the guy who played Will really pulled off that sort of awkward but, kind of capable thing. Also, it was interesting to see the fallout of them taking the knife, because Game of Thrones girl was really sad because her brother, the kid from A Monster Calls, had been gobbled by the spectres and is basically now kind of a zombie. And it seems that the knife was the only thing that he was actually using to keep himself safe from them. Although that does beg a whole load of questions, was it him that they saw wandering around in the tower? And if so, how long had it been that Giacomo had been tied up like that? Was it days? Was it hours? Was it weeks? But it was also interesting to see that Lyra and Will used some ingenuity to get the alethiometer, so good on them, it was a clever plan, even if it didn't quite work. And they've also cleared up the whole issue of the doorways, because it seems like Charles had actually been cutting through City Gazi all along, it was like an interim world between Lyra's and ours, and only Lyra and Will haven't actually found the portal that leads to her Oxford. Although that does kind of raise a question about how Azrael's Rip had managed to leave a gap from Bolvangar in the Arctic, and yet when she went through it she ended up about 1.5 miles away from this little town that's exactly parallel to Oxford in southern England. Maybe we shouldn't ask about that part. But I hate to say it, there was a hell of a lot more this week that I didn't like than what I did. And most of it wasn't anything to do with the Lyra and Will storyline. It wasn't even like the weird scene with the priests where, Cardinal Ineptitude sends the other guy off to prison for having a thought and making a suggestion at a meeting where they're supposed to have thoughts and make suggestions. Clearly he can't work out how to do absolutely anything unless he has Mrs. C holding his hand, because that's what happens in this show. Yeah, a large amount of what actually bugged me this week revolves around the characters of Mrs. Coulter and Charles, or Carlo, or Lord Boreal, or whatever he's been called in this particular week. And a lot of that comes from this side that his character seems to have descended entirely into being all about trying to impress her at any cost. Even though she is so clearly not interested in him, even in the slightest. Now, I'll give the show this. It really doubled down this week on the Lyra's world is super sexist. And, okay, that's something that hasn't really come up expressly, but it has been hinted at. But basically it also showed that Carlo is super sexist, which is probably why the only man that Mrs. Coulter seems to actually have ever cared about was Lord Azrael, because he's the only guy who treated her like an equal. But that's because he doesn't care about anybody, and he also was one of these people who was yeah, I can take you or leave you, and in the end he's left her.
Leaving me a grieving widow, with a child out of wedlock.
Which is probably why she hates him, but still desperately fancies him. Now, fair enough, there's probably some great psychology behind that. I've definitely met people like that. But I mean, they're trying to now give the character motives that humanise her, like with the whole thing about her having abusive parents the other week. But now it was all about, she's a woman is in a man world and it's always held me back. Now, the problem with that is, I don't believe that in this show, because the show has gone out of its way to show that she can get literally anything she wants from anyone, even literally the Pope, who is the head of the entire world in this, and in the biggest organisation in the world anyway. And how her monkey demon can basically kick anybody else's demon butt, while she's literally getting drooled over by every guy in the story. And she's the one who's hard done to, and she's the one who isn't getting what she wants. I mean, either that or she's just mental. I mean, that is possible, but the show doesn't seem to be going that way. It just didn't compute for me at all. And the other side of it is, Carlo's supposed to be capable, intelligent, when we've seen that all the way through the show, all the way through season 1. But in this episode, he's just an idiot. He's an idiot who can't tell that this woman doesn't fancy him, which is kind of odd because we've seen him basically reading and constantly toying with people and manipulating them constantly so far. So it's odd that, Mrs. Coulter's literally sneering and rolling her eyes at him all the way through the episode and he doesn't seem to notice. And also, they've now doubled down on this idea that Mrs. Coulter is probably a witch. Now, they have mentioned stuff about that before. There's been little hints, like her leaving her demon behind and going off to the college was a big thing this week, but she's done other things before. But they haven't really expressly said much, but they do have this little weird line where it sounds like she's almost hinting that she is a witch.
You surely are not the first woman you've witnessed capable of self-control. Have you never encountered witches?
But it just comes across as strange writing, and I don't remember it from the book, maybe it was in it. But I get weird vibes from this line from her about the spectres.
You're wrong, Carlo. Once you understand something, you can master it.
Also the fact that last time she saw them, she was like, oh look, that looks interesting, rather than being worried or freaked out, and she did a little smile. Now, okay, that feels like the kind of thing they're setting up for something, and I just worry about where it's going to go. I mean, there was some other things that slightly bugged me, like Will managing to cut the door just slightly too far away from the thing he was trying to pick up, and then him going, oh, I better shut the door behind me, instead of just like cutting a door really near the compass and putting his hand through, grabbing it and like sealing it back up again. I mean, that would have made a lot more sense. And then the whole fight at the end, I mean, I like the idea that Lyra got so enraged that her demon was more powerful. It was like a personality thing, while Mrs. C was kind of upset and weak and had clearly had a couple of drinks she'd necked. But what was Will doing? I mean, he's supposed to be a boxer. I mean, he might not be a brilliant boxer, but he's okay. And he's literally got a knife that can cut anything. I mean, yeah, sure, he probably doesn't want to kill Charles, but he could have just, like, jagged him a little or something like that, or, done something. And I'm also finding the character of Mayor Malone ridiculous. I mean, aside from her being this, like, serious business lady when this plot needs her to be, the rest of the time she comes across like being a bit of a ditzy idiot. And also, she used to be a nun, so why does she need to crack a Bible open to read about the serpent stuff? I mean, come on, isn't that not like the first chapter of the Bible is Adam and Eve are there, and then look, a snake? I mean, come on, it seems a bit daft. And the whole scene of her getting past the guard didn't ring true for me either, because she's immediately like, oh, I'll phone Charles. Now, as far as she knows, Charles is just somebody she met once who's a random guy. Is it just supposed to be a random name she pulled out of nowhere and just happened to be that the guy works for Charles? Seems a bit odd. But I'm kind of glad that that's another episode out the way and we're closer to the finale. So I'll not waste any more time on this one. I'm just glad that the story is finally tying itself up, and I like that it did a few things to move itself on. But I'm also starting to wonder if they've adapted the story very heavily, or if I just misremembered the end of this book, because I've always remembered that this was the book I liked out of the three of them, but judging by the TV show, I'm actually finding this really dull, so maybe I've just misremembered. But anyway, till next time, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to everybody listening, and especially my patrons, and most especially to Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma, my top tier patrons. Thank you everybody. Everybody stay safe. Cheerio.